So I
They all
guess,
need to clear through the control center. Or we good?
Gravy on it too, so.
This is just a control center of a prison. They control the doors, the keys, all the security. I'll hold it. These are all different parts of the prison operations. That door named labeled J1 150 is the entrance to the death house. So that's where we'll be going.
do the inmates go in these doors?
The inmates are all taken in through a different part of the prison, and you mean the actual
the person who's being
executed inmate? No, they come in through a different part of the prison. There's a back entrance.
Okay.
But this is this here is a ramp for disabled visitors who are serving as witnesses. So any victim's family, media outlet, or offender's family who was going to witness would use this ramp to get into the death house. Thank you. This is going to be a tight fit. We'll go in here into the. I'll explain what this room is. If we can all get in, and I'll try to stand where. Again, you'll be able to get footage individually. This is the witness area. It's a small area, as you can see. Witnesses are limited to 3 on the victim's side, named by the immediate family member of the victim, and 3 on the offender's side, named by the offender. Some offenders elect to have no witnesses. That's at their discretion. There's also generally about 6 media outlets who are in this area. When the execution takes place, the media are escorted into this room first. They stand along the back wall. This door remains open so that the media can walk back and forth between the 2 rooms and be able to see both the inmate and the victim's family as the execution occurs. The victims are escorted over to the witness area next, after the media are in place. They remain on the opposite side of this wall. So the victim's family sits on the opposite side of this wall. And the offender's family comes in last, and they sit in these 3 chairs here. There are times when we have had to open an ancillary viewing area because the offender may have had more victims. And so where there's multiple victims and we can't fit them all in the viewing area here, we open an ancillary viewing area, and it's viewed on closed caption television. You'll see up here monitors. These monitors are used for the witnesses to be able to witness the insertion of the IV lines in the inmate. The insertion of the IV lines are done in the holding cell. It's part of the preparation process. And so these screens come on as that process is started, as the preparation are started, and they remain on while the IV lines are inserted into the inmate. Okay? And we'll come back into this area if you'd like to see more of it. Any questions about the viewing issues?
Is it one way, class?
No, it is not one way.
Is there security in here while that?
There is a staff person who stands security in here. Yes, absolutely. And the inmate can see. Now you'll see that the inmate's head is at the top of the bed. You can see the bed's at an incline. The inmate's head is at the top of the bed. So obviously it's much easier for him to view his family, but he is able to turn his head to view the victim's family if he chooses. The time, that clock on the back wall is the clock that's used to officially time the execution procedures. And we'll talk more about that when we get into there. Okay? All right.
Sure.
So this door, media outlets never crossed except for on these organized media days. Everything that happens with the offender happens behind this door. This station here is a computer station. I'll let everyone in here.
Scoot down.
Larry,
What did you say about what did you say about what happened with the offender here?
it all happens behind this door. The offender arrives here at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility approximately 24 hours before his scheduled execution. Executions are carried out at 10 a.m. On the scheduled date of execution in Ohio. So generally they get here between 9:30 and 10 the day prior. They're transferred down usually from the Ohio State Penitentiary, which is where our male death row is housed. There are currently 166 inmates on death row in Ohio, and one of those is a woman. Once the inmate arrives here at the death house, he's processed in and he's under constant observation by at least 3 members of the execution team the entire time he's here. One member of the execution team sits at this computer terminal and logs the inmate's actions and behaviors that occur with the inmate while he's here. So they log everything from any changes in mood to any visitors he has, any meals served to him, any medical evaluations that occur with him. It's all logged, and you may have seen it. It's posted in an execution timeline that is then released as a public record after the execution is carried out. The inmate is housed in this holding cell. This is where he remains the entire 24 hours that he's here. His meals are served here. As you can see, it's simply a bed, restroom facilities. There is a television there, a radio, and he is permitted to have a holy book of his choosing. When he first arrives here, his property is inventoried. He's permitted to have certain limited items in the cell with him. He's permitted to have access to certain other limited items that would remain here. Any other property that's taken from him, he has the opportunity to tell us what he would like done with that property upon the execution being carried out, whether he would like it destroyed, turned over to family, or that type of thing. He receives a mental health assessment when he arrives here. He also receives a medical assessment. While he's here, the 24 hours he is here, there are at least 3 vein assessments done on the offender. That's both a hands-on vein assessment as well as a file check of his records to determine if there are any foreseeable circumstances that could cause difficulty in inserting an IV line.
What medical training do the people that do that have?
They are medically qualified people. They're not necessarily members of the execution team. They're from the medical staff. So those occur here on site in the holding cell. Those are done upon his arrival, later that evening that he arrived, and then in the morning before 9 o'clock. If they believe there may be a foreseeable problem with gaining IV access, they discuss that issue and try to determine what actions they should take to deal with that issue. This is also the time upon his arrival that he discusses and makes the staff aware of in writing how he would like his body disposed of, what his wishes are in that regards. He makes his special meal request. Special meals are served at 4 p.m. the day of his arrival. That's the day prior to his execution. And he's granted special meal requests that are reasonable and things that we can obtain. Generally, most of the food is food that we have here in the prison kitchen. We do not buy private meals from restaurants and those type of things. It's all prepared here in our kitchens. The inmate, special meal is served at 4 o'clock. He is then able to visit with family from 4:30 that day until 7:30 that evening. At 7:30, his visitations are concluded for the evening. He is permitted telephone access throughout the night at any time that he chooses to make any phone calls. Those calls do have to be made collect. So throughout the evening, he has the option to watch television, read, listen to the radio, and again, he's being observed. And he receives periodic revisits from both the religious service administrator for the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, unless he has requested not to receive those visits, from mental health staff to check on his progress, and from members of the execution team. The next morning, he is permitted to then visit again with friends and family cell front. So he is no longer permitted to have any contact visits. The contact visit could occur the day before, but at 6:30 the following morning, he is permitted cell front visits where 2 at a time, his friends or family can come over and visit with him through this holding cell door. That wraps up at 8:30, but his lawyer and spiritual advisor can stay with him a short period of time later. Approximately an hour prior to the execution at 9 o'clock, he's permitted to shower and dress in the clothes that he will wear for the execution. And he continues to receive any spiritual counseling by the religious services administrator that he elects to have. 15 minutes prior to the scheduled execution, the warden will approach the cell front door, read to him the death warrant that has authorized his execution. It's also in this holding cell that the IV lines are inserted. So when I spoke in the witness area of those 2 television screens coming on and the witnesses observing the IV lines being inserted, the inmate is laying on this bed as that happens. Execution team members who are trained and qualified to insert IV lines insert those lines on this bed. Under the execution protocol, they are to establish 1 or 2 IV sites. The former execution protocol required 2 sites, but now with the inclusion of a backup system, they may only start 1 site if they can't get the second site started. That's all done on the video monitors. You're able to see that process occur if you witness.
Is that new, the video?
No, that is not new. That was actually in use for Long Melbourne.
Is that videotaped?
It is not. It is not. It's only for observation by the witnesses. The execution team is permitted as much time as they need to insert those IV lines. We do not put a time limit on them, nor do we want them to feel rushed in doing that. They take a lot of effort to do their jobs professionally and compassionately, and so they take a lot of time in inserting those IV lines appropriately. You will see, if you're witnessing, the inmate's arms are strapped to a board. There's an IV line. We use a heparin lock for that IV line to keep that IV line open, and we test the IV site with a saline flush. The inmate is then assisted off of the bed, and that's when the video screens in the other room will go dark. He's then escorted 17 steps from this room into the execution chamber, and that's where we'll go next. Any questions before we leave this area, though?
Where are the contact visits? Do they happen here?
No, there's a room that Larry, the contact visits, there's a room.
Is it in this building, or do they go?
It's connected right back here to this building. Yes.
How many steps were there, you said?
17 steps from the holding cell to the execution chamber. Approximately, depending on how large your steps are. Generally, it's about 17 steps. This is an area that's never been used before during immediate time. Small area, so this is the equipment. This is where the director, the assistant director, stand, and it's where the drugs that are used to carry out the execution are administered from. So you'll see phone lines on the wall. These phones are the phones that remain open in case there's any legal action that occurs that would postpone the execution or halt the execution. So basically, there's not a whole lot to this room. This is where the illegal injection is carried out. The inmates escorted into this area by the execution team members. They assist him in climbing onto the bed. He does climb onto the bed himself. He lays down, he's strapped to the bed, and his arms are strapped to these bars here. You'll see this hole in the wall. This is where I told you the tubing comes out through here, and that's the room the drugs are administered from. You'll see that this glass here is somewhat dark. That room remains dark, so during an execution you can't see into that room. So the inmate lays on the execution table. A member of the execution team who is trained in administering IV drugs comes in, inserts the tubing into the heparin locks, and checks that. And then the execution team exits the room. The warden and the execution team leader remain in the room with the offender. At that time, once the execution team person who is trained to administer IV drugs is satisfied that the IV sites are established, the warden will take the microphone there on the wall and take it up to the offender's mouth and offer the offender the opportunity to say any final words. The inmate does not have to tell us beforehand if he chooses to make a final statement. He does not have to write it down and have it approved. He is able to make any final statement that he wishes to make, and for as long as he wishes to make it, as long as it's reasonable. I think the longest we've had was 7 or 9 minutes, something like that. They can also choose not to make a statement. The warden will give a signal, one that you probably won't notice, and that is a signal for the execution team member who is trained to administer IV drugs to start the flow of drugs to the inmate. Once the flow of drugs starts, again, under the new execution protocol, that would be 5 grams of the pentyl sodium, and it's administered using 5 syringes. Now again, it's IV administered, so you'll not see those 5. If you're witnessing, you won't see 5 syringes, but it is 5 syringes of thiopentyl sodium that's pushed through the tubing. If for some reason we need to use the backup method, which is the newest part of our execution protocol, if for some reason the team is not able to establish an IV site, or we have to abandon IV drug administration because there comes to be a problem with the IV site, that is when the execution team can discuss with the warden, who would discuss with the director whether it's approved and appropriate to use intramuscular injection. If it is approved to use intramuscular injection, a person who is trained again in the drugs and in intramuscular injection procedures would enter the room and inject the intramuscular drug into one of the large muscles on the inmate. Generally, that would be a thigh, a deltoid, something like that. Again, that injection will contain 10 milligrams of midazolam and 40 milligrams of hydromorphone. Our execution protocol also includes assessment 5 minutes after that intramuscular injection is given. The medically trained person would again enter the room, check for breathing. If the inmate was still breathing, they could give a second injection of 10 milligrams midazolam, 40 milligrams of hydromorphone. If, again, they would assess the inmate 5 minutes later. If another injection was required, it would just be hydromorphone that was given in the 3rd injection. Once the inmate is no longer breathing, you will see the curtains close. At the time the curtain closes, checks for any signs of life and pronounces the inmate dead and time of death. After the coroner leaves the room, the curtain reopens and the warden pronounces the time of death. Once the execution is carried out, the media witnesses are escorted out of the witness area, and then the offender's family and the victim's family. The media reconvene in the media center. The pool reporters brief the other media outlets who are present on what they observed during the execution. We also let the victim's family and the offender's family know that they are permitted to come into the media center if they want to offer a statement to the media outlets that are assembled. That is, however, at their discretion. Some choose to do so, many do not. Once the pool reporters brief the other media outlets present, we wrap up the day, give the media outlets any time they need to post their stories or send their footage, and then we close the media center. Once the witnesses are escorted out of the room, the inmate's body is placed on a gurney, and it is the inmate's body is disposed of in the manner that he requests. So if he requests a family member to take possession of his body, and the family member is willing to do that, then we have the body removed by the coroner, but it is then turned over to the family to be disposed of at their discretion. If the inmate has no family, decides not to have his family take responsibility for his body, or the family can't afford to do it, then we would make arrangements with a local funeral home to dispose of the body. Are there questions?
What's the protocol that the warden would determine whether intramuscular is used or not? What's the criteria? Is there
Well, there's not a set, our policy doesn't call for a set number of times to insert an IV line. So there's not after 20 or 40, whatever, 10, 20. If the execution team members feel like they either can't establish a usable IV site or they're concerned that they could not maintain a usable IV site, they would discuss that with the warden, who would discuss it also with the director, and the decision would be made at that time. But again, one of the changes in the execution protocol is they can establish either one or two IV sites. And if for some reason they either couldn't establish that site or the site became unusable and had to be abandoned, then they could move to the intramuscular backup system.
Julie, did you say that when the inmate is here on the table, that it would be easier for him to see the victims?
No, his family is here. And so because of the incline, generally he's looking at his family or friends or attorneys or whomever he has designated as his three witnesses. He has to turn his head and make an effort to see the victim's family.
Julie, in Ramel Broom's case, was it then established in his holding cell that they couldn't establish?
Correct. They were still in the preparation procedures. They actually established a site several times, but when they ran the saline flush to the site, it became unusable, and that was established in that holding cell. He never walked into the execution chamber.
What if you're mid-process and you discover that the veins are not usable?
Then they can move to the backup system.
Even if they've started injecting the first drugs?
Yes. Our policy does speak to that. So if you go back and look at our policy, it does speak to that. Other questions?
Cameras are kept separate,
They are kept separate, and we do
so
ask.
they leave separately. I mean, that
Correct.
door doesn't
They're
open.
That door remains open because the media witnesses who are present are able to walk from one side to the other. But I'm in the room, Larry Green's in the room, and so we ask that while the families are in the room, they remain seated and be very respectful of the other witnesses who are present. So we stand in there and make sure there's no crossing. In addition, the victims who are present are escorted by staff from our Office of Victim Services who remain with them. And then the offender's family who are here, we stay on that. There is security on the side of the room as well.
The team members who administer the IVs, you said that they were trained and qualified.
Yes, they have
Can you be a little more elaborate on that? In what manner?
Yeah, they receive training, but they also have to be medically trained and have at least 1 year of experience as a paramedic, EMT, medical assistant, military corpsman, one of those areas.
Is a physician a member of the execution team
No.
as well? No.
No. The execution team is made up of at least 12 people who are selected by the warden to fulfill the responsibilities they are assigned to in the execution team. But anyone who's involved in administering the drugs or establishing the IV sites have to be trained and qualified to do that under the law. The execution, the victim's family actually assembles at the highway patrol post here locally, and they're brought to the institution at a time that we determine, because the offender's family can start coming at 6 o'clock in the morning to actually do those last visitations with the offender. And so we take great effort to keep them separate. Any other questions?